The South Korean government unveils a set of emergency measures to rein in runaway inflation. Finance Minister Chu Kyung-ho has announced a package worth some $2.5 billion to stabilize people's livelihoods. The battle in Ukraine's east intensifies as Russian troops move in on one of the last big cities in the region still under Kyiv's control. Meanwhile, US President Joe Biden says his country will not send Ukraine rocket systems that are capable of reaching Russia. There's less than 24 hours until millions of South Koreans head to the polls for the June 1st local elections. 17 mayor and governor posts and hundreds of council positions are up for grabs. 7 National Assembly seats are also at stake in parliamentary by-elections.
Hello and welcome to New Day at Arirang. It's Tuesday, May 31st, 8 a.m. here in Seoul, South Korea. I'm Lee Seung-jae.
I'm Oh Seung. Thank you for joining us this morning because over the next hour, we'll be giving you a look at some of the biggest headlines of the day and key issues facing Korea and the rest of the world. Meetings are held to devise new measures to tame soaring consumer prices.
That's right. The finance chief unveiled 10 projects that should help stabilize the cost of living. Ji-young with our top story.
The South Korean government has laid out a set of emergency measures to rein in runaway prices. Finance Minister Chu Kyung-ho unveiled on Monday a package worth roughly $2.5 billion to stabilize people's livelihoods. This came in the first meeting he's held with the other economy-related ministers since his appointment earlier this month.
The emergency package includes 10 projects that are closely related to people's livelihoods, including food, living, and housing expenses that can be implemented immediately.
First of all, the government will work to bring down food prices. It's going to remove import duties on certain items that have recently seen prices surge. Until the end of this year, the government's going to switch over to quota tariffs on 7 food items, including pork, wheat, and eggs, which means a certain amount can be imported duty-free. With this, the price of imported pork could fall by as much as 20%. The value-added tax of 10% on processed foods, including kimchi and soybean paste, will be eliminated as well. Under the plan, the government expects to bring down inflation by 0.1 of a percentage point. Along with food, Chu also announced support for living expenses.
To bring down living expenses, the government is going to provide help in areas including education, transportation, and phone bills.
Despite the Bank of Korea raising its base interest rate, the government will keep the rate on student loans steady at 1.7%, the same as in the first half of this year. Also, with car prices soaring, the government is going to extend the 30% cut in consumption tax. The government also plans to bring down property taxes to a level similar to 2020 prior to the surge in housing prices. Capital gains tax will be eased for people who own multiple homes when they sell their properties so that more can be put onto the market. Also, to help more people get onto the property ladder, the government is going to raise the limit on loan-to-value for mortgages to 80% for first-time homebuyers. Ji-young, Arirang News.
Following the passage of the Yoon administration's first extra budget bill on Sunday, the government has taken immediate action. Funds were set aside to help businesses hit hard by virus prevention measures. Our Kim Do-yeon with the details on who qualifies for the payments.
The South Korean government started making payments to small businesses and merchants on Monday, just hours after the extra budget was passed. So who exactly gets these cash payments and how much are they? The budget allocates $18.6 billion for this round of payments for small and medium-sized business owners and merchants who suffer losses due to the virus prevention measures. 3.71 million recipients in total. This time around, payments will also go to registered companies with revenues as high as $4 million. Generally, each recipient will get at least 6 million won and as much as 8 million won depending on the size of their losses. That's about 4,800 to 6,500 US dollars. But there are around 50 industries that were deemed to be hit especially hard. These businesses will get up to 10 million won, about $8,100. So how can owners prove the size of their losses? The answer is they don't have to. The government has already reviewed tax data to see whose revenues fell and by how much. When can I apply? Applications started at noon on Monday. The first day is for businesses whose registration ends in an even number. The second day, Tuesday, is for those ending in an odd number. Then, applications open to everyone on Wednesday. Because the government already has the information it needs, the payments will go out within hours. What about payments to individuals who don't have a registered business? The budget includes compensation for freelancers and others who are self-employed. These include 700,000 people like taxi drivers as well as 30,000 people working in the arts and as performers. They'll each get 2 million won, which is around $1,600. But these individuals will have to apply and prove their losses, so the actual payment will take more than a month. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
With South Korea continuing to see a drop in COVID-19 cases, most community treatment centres and temporary screening clinics will stop operating from Wednesday. According to the Health Ministry on Monday, it will close down 12 residential treatment centres across the country, which have been treating those with mild COVID-19 symptoms. However, the one designated for inbound foreigners will still be open. Health authorities will prepare additional quarantine facilities and sick beds if the number of COVID-19 patients climbs back up. The operation of the remaining 78 temporary screening clinics will also end. Those who wish to get tested should now visit public health centres. The nation's daily COVID-19 tally was at its lowest in 4 months. For a Monday, the figures were down from almost 10,000 a week ago. China is lifting curbs on businesses in Shanghai, with case numbers declining as well. Our Han Song-woo has the latest.
South Korea reported 6,139 new cases of COVID-19 on Monday, its lowest daily figure in more than 4 months, and less than half of what was recorded the day before. Health authorities reported 9 more deaths, the first time the figure has been below 10 since November last year. Monday's figures, however, likely reflect fewer tests being taken over the weekend. And officials have cautioned that a lack of ventilation from an increase in air conditioner use could lead to mid-sized outbreaks in the weeks to come. Like South Korea, China is also witnessing a slow but steady decline in cases, reporting just 122 new infections across the country on Monday, according to its health authorities. More than half of those came from Shanghai, while Beijing recorded just 12 new cases. The downward trend has prompted the Chinese government to ease prevention measures in certain areas of Beijing. Shanghai, meanwhile, announced over the weekend that unreasonable curbs imposed on businesses will be lifted starting June 1st. In contrast, the United States is showing signs of a potential resurgence. The Hill, citing data from the Johns Hopkins Coronavirus Research Center, reported on Sunday that the 7-day averages are more than 6 times what they were a year ago. Just under 120,000 infections as of Saturday, compared to 17,887 on May 28, 2021. COVID-related deaths were down from last year, though, which the Hill is attributing to increased immunity through vaccines and prior infections, as well as the wider availability of treatments. The Hill also noted that COVID-19 infections in the U.S. are currently well below the peaks of this winter, when the Omicron variant spread out of control. Han Sung-woo, Arirang News.
Now, as the battle in Ukraine's east heats up, Russian troops are trying to encircle the city of Severodonetsk, one of the last big cities in the eastern part of the country that's still under Kyiv's control. Kim Yo-sun has more.
The battle for Severodonetsk, one of the last big cities under Ukrainian control in the eastern part of the country, is emerging as a focal point in Russia's war against Ukraine. The governor of the Luhansk region said that Russian troops continue to bombard the area constantly as Moscow attempts to encircle the city of about 100,000 people in a bid to gain control of the Donbas region. This comes as Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky also warned earlier that fighting in the east is becoming increasingly bloody.
In the aftermath of Russian strikes on Severodonetsk, all the town's critical infrastructure was destroyed. 90% of buildings are damaged. More than 2/3 of residential dwellings are completely destroyed. There is no telecommunications. The shelling is non-stop.
In related news, U.S. President Joe Biden told reporters Monday that his country will not send rocket systems to Ukraine that are capable of reaching Russia. The comments follow reports that the U.S. is mulling over sending advanced long-range rocket systems to Ukraine. Meanwhile, Russian President Vladimir Putin has attributed ongoing global food shortages to, quote, short-sighted Western policies. In a phone call with his Turkish counterpart Monday, Putin also explained that Russia is ready to export significant volumes of fertilizers and food in case Western sanctions against Moscow are lifted. While Russia and Ukraine together account for nearly 30% of global wheat exports, dozens of container ships remain blocked in Ukrainian ports by the Russian Navy, hindering exports of wheat, sunflower oil, as well as other foodstuffs. Kim Hyo-sun, Arirang News.
The top defense officials of the United States and China could hold their first in-person talks in 3 years. Now, the Wall Street Journal reported on Monday local time that discussions are ongoing to set up the meeting on the sidelines of the Shangri-La Dialogue, an annual security conference which will take place in Singapore next month. This comes amid simmering tensions between the two countries over Taiwan, which China claims is part of its territory. Beijing responded angrily after U.S. President Joe Biden said that Washington would respond militarily if China invades Taiwan during his recent trip to Asia.
It's time for On Point, where we speak to experts to delve deeper into some of the key issues in the spotlight right now. For more than 2 years, the world has been battling the COVID-19 pandemic, and while things have improved significantly since the peak of the outbreak, there's still no end in sight.
That's right, but how are some countries still tackling the pandemic, and what else should we be concerned about moving forward? Well, for this, we are joined online with Bennett Cowling, Chair Professor of Epidemiology at the University of Hong Kong. Professor Cowling, thank you very much for joining us this morning.
Good morning.
All right, so first and foremost, we want to start off in China there. What's the situation in Beijing and Shanghai like after all the testing and strict measures that were in place to tackle the virus? I do understand there's been some lifting of the measures as well.
Yeah, Shanghai's been locked down for 2 months now, and they've managed to get Omicron BA2 under control. It's a remarkable effort. They're now down to maybe double-digit cases per day, mostly or maybe even all in quarantine. That means the contact tracing's working, and they do have a plan to relax further, but I don't think they're going to be back to normal in the near-term future. I think there's still going to be quite a number of restrictions in Shanghai, particularly to prevent an immediate resurgence in community cases. And remember that the epidemics ended because of the control measures, not because of herd immunity, because of a lot of infections. So this could happen again anytime. In a month's time, in 2 months' time, in 3 months' time, they could have another outbreak requiring a shutdown of Shanghai. In Beijing, they acted much more quickly. So they've had much fewer cases and a much shorter lockdown. But unfortunately, yesterday, there was a person who didn't comply with the quarantine and then potentially has sparked another small community outbreak in Beijing. So some restrictions are coming back. So it's difficult, actually, in mainland China at the moment. There's other cities affected, and I think there's going to be a lot of disruption in the remainder of this year with outbreaks here and there, which are not easy to control each time they occur.
And while it might be true that COVID-19 isn't as deadly to children, we've still seen small numbers succumb to the virus, even here in South Korea. But what's the global situation like when it comes to children and COVID-19?
It's really unfortunate. We know COVID is generally mild in children, but it's not always the case. In the United States, they have 1 million COVID deaths. Only 400 of those are in children below the age of 5. And that's the age group where we generally don't have vaccines available. So it's really a concern. I'm not sure what the best solution is. I know that some of the vaccine companies are testing out vaccines in younger children. If those become available, that would be great. But it's really sad to see whenever a child dies of COVID. It's much rarer, of course, than the severity of COVID is much lower in children than it is in older people. So they're not the highest risk group, but still, it's really something that we have to think more carefully about in the coming years. And I do hope that vaccines will become available for young children.
Yeah, even here in the country, I mean, we've been getting, dozens of cases where the younger children have unfortunately succumbed to the virus. And it's tougher, like you said, when it comes to kids who are under 5 years old. I mean, again, no vaccines in place. Hard to have the masks on as well. So I guess all the more we have to be careful in that age group. But also more and more countries now opening up their borders with no quarantine for inbound travelers. Professor, are we ready to ease the travel restrictions already, though?
Well, I think so. I think in Korea, you face the worst that COVID has to offer. And so from now on, I don't really see a rationale for travel measures. What are they there for? What are you trying to stop? We know that when new variants arise in other parts of the world, it would be nice in an ideal world if you could keep it out of Korea, if other countries could keep it out. In reality, that's not going to happen. Once a new variant arises in another part of the world, it will find its way into other countries sooner or later, and travel restrictions have enormous economic costs. So those enormous costs may have been justified earlier in the pandemic as part of all of the measures that have been used to control COVID. But now, middle of 2022, I think there's little justification anymore for travel restrictions. And I mean the testing that goes on, the vaccination restrictions maybe. I don't think that's necessary. The post-arrival quarantines, whatever other measures are placed in different places, different parts of the world, they still have some of these measures in place. And I think all of them could go.
And Professor, there are more and more concerns about the so-called long COVID. I mean, what are the most common symptoms and how long do they actually last?
Still a lot of uncertainty about long COVID, and it's a big concern of many people. I think there are maybe 3 categories that we can talk about for long COVID. The first category is what people often think of as long COVID. That's the post-viral fatigue and brain fog that does happen in some people. It's not clear how frequently it happens, but it does happen. There's many documented cases, and it's really unfortunate because that is something we don't know how long it's going to last for and what the best way to achieve a recovery from that. So that's post-viral syndrome. A second problem is complications that result from the infection. And that's particularly maybe in more severe cases who've been in hospital, maybe who've even been in intensive care with a ventilator. Maybe they have some organ damage, maybe some other physiological damage to their body because of the infection. And that's something that they can recover from, but it takes time and it takes rehabilitation. And then the third category of long COVID is maybe the persistent symptoms, which may or may not actually be long COVID. So that's like people who lost their sense of smell or taste during their COVID infection, and they haven't yet got it back. And so that's a persistent symptom. Those, I think, will resolve sooner or later, but it may take a bit of time for the body to fully heal. So it's the first one that we're most concerned about, the post-viral syndrome. It does happen with other viral infections. It's not unique to COVID, and it's something that we really have to understand better. One question is whether it's been happening as frequently with Omicron infections as it did in the past, and also whether vaccines have been able to reduce the chance of long COVID occurring. I hope that's the case, but a lot of the data that you see in the news in recent weeks will be data from earlier in the pandemic with different strains of COVID, maybe different variants, and also in people who hadn't been vaccinated. We don't have so much up-to-date data yet.
Yeah, I do have a friend who contracted COVID-19 more than a year ago, and still he hasn't gotten his sense of taste back, which was very concerning, to be honest with you. Probably there are other people that experience the same thing. Professor, as an expert in the field, what is your biggest concern moving forward? Because it does seem like, with weaker symptoms and lower fatality rate with the Omicron, I mean, there are less people concerned about the pandemic. At the same time, really, anything could happen with this virus.
Well, I really hope that we've seen the end of COVID as a pandemic virus, and that in the future it will become a seasonal threat that we're more comfortable managing, like influenza. But I do have a concern in the back of my mind. What if there's a new variant again, another thing after Omicron that really it causes a whole load of trouble again? But I think there's a pretty low chance of that happening, because now we have such high levels of immunity in our population with vaccines and also with the infections that have occurred in the past. And also remember, we have antiviral drugs now, which are very effective in treating COVID. So I think we're in the best position we can be to move forwards in the fight against COVID. But for me, as an infectious disease epidemiologist, I'm always worried about what's next on the horizon. Is it another virus? I don't think monkeypox is a major public health threat at present, but maybe another virus will appear, and then I'll have to deal with that. I would actually quite like to have a bit of a break. Let's have some peace and quiet for a few years, but before anything else really serious happens. Thank you.
Well, hopefully even pandemics will go on a bit of a holiday, just to give us a bit of a breather before they come back. But, well, thank you so much for your insights, Professor Cowling, and we look forward to speaking with you again next week.
Thank you.
And that wraps up the first half of New Day at Arirang.
But do stick around, we have more coming your way in the second half, so we'll be back in just a moment.
The OECD has revised its growth outlook up for South Korea.
For South Korea's economic growth this year.
To revive the peace process in the Korean Peninsula, the talks in officially ending the
post-pandemic era through its Korean New Deal initiative. The South Korean government is aiming to secure the country a dominant share in the global digital and green industries.
Arirang, what matters?
넌 볼 수 없고 가질 수 없어 뚝뚝 눈물 쏟아내도 뜨거운 자태 한번 비추지 않고 내게만 가치란 그녀는 유명한 서울의 별다 어딨나 In your eyes 걔와 함께면 넌 디스토피아 내 발걸음 따라오면 유토피아 나의
I feel so good right now. Maybe I had a drink or two, but this somehow feels like it's forever. All my friends are here having fun and feeling good right now. Maybe this is forever. All my friends are here having fun and feeling good right now. Forever.
Welcome back to the second half of New Day at Arirang. Now it's less than a day until voting in the June 1st local and parliamentary by-elections begins, with results likely to boost or even weaken the mandate of the new Yoon administration.
And to be decided in Wednesday's elections include 17 metropolitan mayors and provincial governors, 226 lower-level council heads, as well as 779 seats in provincial and metropolitan councils and 2,602 in lower-level local councils. 7 National Assembly seats in parliamentary by-elections are also up for grabs. Voting hours are 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. at 14,465 polling centres nationwide. COVID-19 patients and those in quarantine can vote between 6:30 p.m. and 7:30 p.m. Seoul's Foreign Ministry launched its own Economic Security Centre. The Centre for Economic Security and Foreign Affairs will house a team of 16 experts in various fields including security, digital technology and law. They'll be tasked with monitoring global supply chains and evolving technology trends, as well as semiconductor technologies. During its opening ceremony on Monday, the nation's foreign minister pledged to pursue proactive diplomacy to enhance Korea's economic security amid strategic competition around the world. The price of metals used in making EV batteries could soon come down. Bloomberg cited Goldman Sachs analysts on Sunday as saying that the prices of cobalt, lithium and nickel are expected to drop over the next 2 years. Investment in metals outstripped long-term demand in terms of EVs, led by fundamental mispricing. South Korea, while a leading battery maker, has one of the world's highest dependencies on imports of such materials in the world.
Now, South Korea is launching its first digital wardrobe of virtual outfits, otherwise known as meta fashion. According to the Ministry of Trade, Industry and Energy, there will be 30 digital outfits on display by November for people to buy and use in the metaverse. 3 top designers are on board, including hanbok designer Hwang Yi-seul, who has designed outfits for BTS member Jimin. 3 celebrities will be modeling for their virtual outfits, including singer Ravi and actress Han Seon-hwa. Now, meta fashion is the latest craze in the industry because it allows designers to be more creative without leaving any carbon footprint. Now, South Korea plans to use special air filters that keep the air inside airplane cabins clean in ramping up its effort against COVID-19. Now, the filters will be first installed in kindergartens and schools to test whether they can effectively prevent virus infections during the summer. Cho Sung-min has more.
Airplanes use special filters called HEPA, short for high-efficiency particulate air, to keep the cabin air clean. The same filters are also installed in hospitals, blocking out 99.9% of all known viruses. Using the same fundamental structure, a research team at the Korea Institute of Energy Research recently developed a type of photothermal technology. Using electromagnetic radiation, the technology can kill 99% of all coronaviruses. While some prototypes have already been given the green light for commercialization, the team is currently figuring out ways to apply the technology in more diverse and user-friendly ways. The filters can be attached to an electric mask to better prevent exposure to aerosols, an essential step in preventing coronavirus infections. They can also be used with air purifiers, which not only keep the air clean, but also kill viruses. In fact, South Korea's antivirus authorities have decided to adopt these special air purifiers to counter any lingering waves of COVID-19. The country's quarantine-related ministries have jointly launched a program to establish testing guidelines to see how effective HEPA filters and technologies are. The filters that meet the standards will be installed at daycare centers, kindergartens, and schools.
Because students spend a long time together in the same classrooms, the Education Ministry came up with the idea, and the Central Disaster Headquarters has approved it.
Authorities believe the new filters will help prevent virus infections from occurring among hospitalized patients when temperatures rise in summer, especially since managing air ventilation and circulation is key to keeping the indoors virus-free. Cho Sung-min, Arirang News.
It's time for Global Insight, where we speak to experts from around the world on issues making headlines. Now, over 30 million South Koreans are set to go to the polls on Wednesday as local government and parliamentary by-elections are held for some 17 mayors and provincial governor positions, along with over 3,600 council seats of varying ranks. And 7 National Assembly seats, of course, will also be up for grabs. And well, with the local elections coming up, just less than a month than President Yoon being inaugurated into office on May 10th, it's going to be the first test of confidence in his government. With less than 24 hours to go before the polls open, we discussed the local and parliamentary by-election races to be held on June 1st with An Jun-sung, visiting professor of Yonsei University's Graduate School of International Studies, and David Tizard, professor of Korean Studies at Seoul Women's University. Very warm welcome to you both, and well, lovely to see you here, Professor An. My first question going to you. So, well, right now with the June 1st elections being held tomorrow, the biggest focus seems to be on the Seoul Mayor and Gyeonggi-do Province Governor post. So let's begin there. Let's begin with Seoul, where the incumbent Oh Se-hoon has a clear lead over Song Yong-gil from the Democratic Party of Korea. So first of all, what's the reason for Oh's popularity, and what was the reason that the DP put Song forward for mayor?
Well, good morning, right? Okay, well, in respect of the Oh Se-hoon's popularity, I think there's 2 different aspects. First of all, he's very strong incumbent, right? And because he has been elected as Seoul mayor before, right, already, and he has done his job pretty well. For instance, right, he's received over 62% of the vote for the last election. And second, his real estate plan, our policy, got popular among the Seoul citizens, right? His policy, which is in line with his political party, PPP, right? The PPP's policy is that focused on the supplying more housing and then urban redevelopment. However, on the contrary, the Song Yong-gil is not a strong contender to the Oh Se-hoon. For instance, well, he never been elected as the mayor, right? And his political party's real estate plan policy has been failed, and which caused more, problem to the current housing market in Seoul, right? So I think there's a policy issue, and then the personal experience differences, right?
Professor Tizard, well, it looks like the PPP's candidates, they're pretty much in the lead in Seoul and Gyeonggi-do Province. So what does that really indicate about what people want?
It's a very good question, and good morning to you all. I think it indicates what people want, but it also shows us what people don't want. So in the last 2 elections, in the mayor election and in the recent presidential election, the Conservative Party have won both of those. And while some analysts might suggest that this is a sign of South Korea shifting to the right or a growth of conservatism in South Korea, I see it rather differently. I think South Korea is becoming more progressive, more open-minded on various issues, but it shows us that this was in some ways an anti-vote. It was expressing their disappointment with the previously ruling Democratic Party. There was a lot of hope for President Moon's administration. A lot of that hope and the wishes from the Candlelight Revolution didn't come to fruition, and so people are now desiring change. Some of the change that they want, as Professor An mentioned earlier, centers on the housing issue. The housing market in South Korea, in Seoul in particular, is very difficult. It's hard for young people, middle-aged people, or even old people to find a home. That's one of the key issues, and people are hoping that the new administration will tackle that. There's also a hope that COVID restrictions and payments to self-employed or middle-sized companies will come into place. People want an end to the COVID-19 pandemic, and so they see the new president, his administration, and the PPP as a symbol of that change, as a move on out of the pandemic. Of course, there are many people in South Korea. They all want different things, but a return to normalcy, some housing prices, and just a bit of change seem to be some of the key issues here, I think.
And well, Professor An, currently the Democratic Party of Korea, which is now the opposition party, it holds a strong majority in parliament, having swept up all the votes in the last local elections. But how can the ruling PPP secure a significant win? I mean, how many seats or which kind of positions would they have to really gain in order to turn the situation around in their favor?
Yes, well, in addition to the local election, right, there are 7 by-election for the National Assembly seat, right? Including the former DP president candidate Lee Jae-myung. But however, the local election does not directly affect on the composition of the National Assembly, right? That's local election is local election. We'll have to see the general election, which will take place in 2024. Right. So now it's only 7 seats is in competition, right? 7 out of 300. Well, it's not a significant number, but still, and it have the impact on the big name players. What else? Lee Jae-myung and An Chol-soo, right? The big name players will have some impact on the political climate in Korea in the future, right? And also if President Yoon's party have the significant victory on the local election, which will have positive impact on the upcoming general election as well. I think that so we'll have to see what happens.
Professor Tizard, well, speaking of the by-elections with some big names there like An Chol-soo and also Lee Jae-myung, well, do you think this indicates them running for the by-election seats? Do you think this indicates that they're willing to come out again for the next presidential election?
We've just finished one presidential election and you're asking me about the next one in 5 years.
We want to get ahead.
Yeah, it's a very difficult question. Thank you so much. One of the big differences you'll notice between the presidential election and the local elections is that the local elections here, they take place on the street. So for the presidential election, most of it was on television. There were these debates. It was covered in money and glitz and glamour. These local elections generally take place with a lot of campaigning, with a lot of trucks, with a lot of noise. And so from a personal perspective, it's very interesting to see these huge frontrunners, as Professor An mentioned, An Chol-soo, Lee Jae-myung. They've gone from that presidential campaign now to these local elections where it's very much getting on the street, shaking hands with people and making a noise because the budgets are much less. An Chol-soo looks like he's doing rather well in his. Lee Jae-myung is a little bit more debatable. That's a very tight race that he's in. I'm sure both men will be looking forward to the next 5 years, but I think 5 years is a long time. And in South Korea, for the next presidential election, one can only hope that there might be some fresh faces coming forward, some new voices in South Korean politics. Not to say anything against those two respected gentlemen, but change is always a good thing. And so 5 years in the future, who knows what might happen, but good luck to them both in their current campaigns.
Exactly, and while the South Korean public clearly have wanted change for quite some time, and Professor An, now the June 1st races, they're largely expected to reflect public sentiment towards the Yoon administration's first few weeks in office. And well, right now, what's the public sentiment towards him, and in terms of how he's handled the most important state affairs?
Yeah, actually, well, the public sentiment toward the President Yoon has been gradually improving, actually. The most recent survey showed that his approval rate exceeds 54%, which is the highest so far. Well, I think that this approval rate increase has been caused by several factors, right, including that bilateral summit meeting with the U.S. President Joe Biden, and also the successful implementation of a supply budget at the National Assembly with a record high amount of 62 trillion won. So basically, money talks, right? So I think that's a good sign for the President Moon and his political party. We'll call like convention effect as well, right?
And your thoughts on this, Professor Tizard? What do you think is the public sentiment towards the Yoon administration right now? I mean, do you think it's currently working in his favour?
I think a lot of political analysts will point to this local election as being evidence of support or rejection of President Yoon Suk-yeol's first few weeks in office. I respectfully disagree with that, I think, because I think people will be voting. They haven't really changed their mind in the last few weeks. Whether they like President Yoon or supported him a few weeks ago, they're likely to still hold that position. And if they don't, I don't believe their minds will have changed too much in the last few weeks. Of course, some people are going to say that the meeting with US President Biden, that the North Korean provocations, that some ruptures in the Democratic Party are all playing into this, and we have to account for some of that. I do agree. Yet more broadly, I don't really believe that public sentiment will have shifted to a great degree since the very recent presidential election. President Yoon will still have his supporters, and they will be supporting him and his party and the various candidates in these local elections. There might be some change, and as Professor Ahn said, there is some growing support. President Yoon seems to be growing into his role and winning some people over with his positions, but I think we're more likely to see a continuation of the recent two, the mayoral election and the presidential election, and I think those views will still hold.
Professor Ahn, now early voting took place over the weekend and it came to 20.6% in turnout, and that's higher than the last two local elections. What do you think this really indicates, and do you think we're going to see just as a high turnout tomorrow?
Well, I mean, as you said, like considering like record high voting rate of 60.6, 20.6%, right? Well, we have a higher expectation. But however, if you compare with the last election was 20.1%, so it's only 0.5% actually the difference. But still is the the highest for last for several elections, right? So I guess I'm expecting that based on the higher, record high the early voting rate, I guess the was, our final figure will be exceed previous one, which was about 60%. But I don't think it's going to be over 65% because this local election is not, really popular. It's not as much as popular like with the, presidential elections. So about somewhere 60 to 65%. But anyway, I think that the record high early voting rate, might be the sign. I say might be the sign of a stronger public support for the President Yoon and his political party. Well, but however, we have to wait and see what really happen, tomorrow.
And Professor Tizard, now foreigners can vote in local elections, foreign residents, of course, and despite the growing proportion of those who are eligible to vote, turnout has been on the decline. Now, why do you think this is?
It's a very good question. Let me try to deconstruct it for you, for those of you that know my work elsewhere. I am eligible to vote, and I'll be voting tomorrow. There's about 120,000 people eligible to vote, citizens that are not Korean, foreign residents, permanent residents. And in 2005, South Korea became the first Asian country to allow non-citizens to vote. This is a beautiful thing. It's a great sign of South Korea's forward thinking. The narrative at the moment is turnout amongst foreign residents is decreasing. If I can just give you an example of this, however, to see it a different way. In 2010, 4,000 non-citizens voted. In 2014, 8,000 non-citizens voted. In 2018, that number jumped to 14,000. So the number of non-citizens voting in this is growing all the time. It's doubling, more than doubling. And so we have this narrative that the non-citizens aren't, and there's this. But that's one way of looking at it. The other way to look at it is this number is increasing every time, and I would expect it will also increase this time. So then we're left with this question of, who are these non-citizens? South Korea has a way of demarcating everybody is Korean and then everybody else is other. But those others, they're so diverse in terms of their occupation, in terms of their nationality, in terms of their socioeconomic status. So I think it would be more appropriate to unpack who those people are and why some of those people aren't voting and why the people are voting are doing that. That to me is the important question going on there.
I think we're about to zoom out of that meeting with you on the screen there, but do excuse our technical glitches there. But yes, and finally, Professor Ahn, now it looks like the Democratic Party of Korea are experiencing some internal there's some internal strife going on within the party as well, and with them falling behind the PPP in most polls. What do you think this election really means for them? Do you think they're going to have some soul searching to do?
Well, we see that what happening right now to DP is very similar thing happened to PPP for the last presidential election, right? Some disagreement among the leader group, and then some lot of issues about policy issues, right? So I guess it's like a more like time because that now is power shifting from the Liberal Party to the Conservative Party, right? Things changing. So I guess it's kind of a changing process, right? So still, and then as the loser of the last presidential candidate, the election, DP have to do better than what they're doing right now, because they have to persuade the public that they deserve better than what they are doing right now. So.
Well, as Professor Tizard said as well, hopefully we'll see some fresh new faces in the next elections to come. And well, this is where we'll have to wrap up the interview, but that was An Jun-sung, visiting professor of Yonsei University's Graduate School of International Studies, and David Tizard, professor of Korean Studies at Seoul Women's University. Thank you both so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you.
Let's take a look at what's going on in the world now. In Brazil's northeastern state of Pernambuco, the death toll from flooding and landslides following recent heavy rain has now climbed to 91. On top of that, officials say 26 people are still missing and 4,000 people have been displaced. Speaking to the press during a visit to the region on Monday, Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro said that the disaster was unfortunate and that similar events had occurred in cities before. At least 5 states in the northeast of the country have declared a state of emergency, while Reuters has said that this is Brazil's 4th major flood in the past 5 months. Authorities in Nepal on Monday said that they have found the wreckage of the plane that crashed in the Himalayan country on Sunday and recovered 21 bodies out of the 22 on board. They added that the difficult terrain and poor weather have impeded search efforts. The Tara air flight reportedly crashed into the mountainside 15 minutes after taking off from the town of Pokhara on Sunday at an altitude of 4,400 meters. Among the dead are 2 Germans, 4 Indians and 16 Nepalese. The Nepali government has formed a panel to investigate the incident. In Beijing on Monday, Chinese President Xi Jinping met with the new chief executive of Hong Kong, John Lee. Having been voted in by Hong Kong's largely pro-Beijing election committee on May 8th, Lee received his formal letter of appointment during his trip to the Chinese capital and will assume office on July 1st. President Xi praised the incoming chief executive for his patriotism and dedication to safeguarding national security in the special administrative region. Xi also emphasized the government's commitment to the one country, two systems principle, allowing Hong Kong to operate with a large degree of autonomy. UEFA has commissioned an independent report into events surrounding Saturday's Champions League final between Liverpool and Real Madrid in Paris. According to the European football governing body on Monday, ticket fraud and crowd trouble will be the focus of the investigation. This comes after France's sports minister claimed 30,000 to 40,000 Liverpool supporters attempted to enter the stadium with fake tickets or none at all, leading authorities to use pepper spray on fans outside the stadium before match start. The final was also affected, kicking off 37 minutes late. Meanwhile, France's interior minister blamed crowd issues on, quote, fraud at an industrial level. After winning the Eurovision Song Contest earlier this month, Ukraine's Kalush Orchestra raised funds for their country's military by selling their trophy for $900,000. They sold the crystal microphone trophy on Sunday through a Facebook auction. At the same time, the band's lead singer also auctioned off his signature pink hat for a further $374,000. The funds will be used to purchase a PD-2 unmanned aerial system for Ukraine's armed forces. The system includes 3 drone aircraft and a ground control station. Matthew Ashley, Arirang News.
Good morning. Well, I'm sure I wasn't the only one carrying an umbrella all day yesterday, but it did not rain. Well, today we'll have sunny skies and warmth nationwide, And the weather for tomorrow, which is local election day here in Korea, should be a repeat of today's conditions. Very high UV rays will beam down on us, so use a sunscreen that has over SPF 30 and PA++ to protect yourself from UVB and UVA. And of course, don't forget to apply it around your ears and neck as well. Morning lows in most parts are about 2 to 5 degrees lower than the same time yesterday, starting out at 15 degrees in Gwangju and Gyeongju. Afternoon temperatures will be 1 to 7 degrees higher this afternoon, so big gaps between lows and highs today. Decent air quality expected nationwide all day today. Tomorrow is a temporary holiday, and next Monday is Memorial Day, a national holiday. So many may take time off at the end of the work week to get away. And for now, the weather seems to be promising through early next week. With that, here's a look at the weather conditions around the globe.
And that wraps up our newscast for this hour, but we'll be back for our Thursday's edition of New Day at Arirang.
Thanks very much for tuning in, and do stay tuned for more updates throughout the day. Have a great rest of your day wherever you are. Goodbye.